Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. This episode is entitled, How to Water Your Garden. What? You're probably thinking, of course I know how to water my garden, my lawn, my indoor plants. I'm a gardener. Well, as Farmer Fred Garden Rule number 8 says, if it works for you, fine. But keep an open mind. So open your mind and join us as America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, walks us through the yard and the house with advice on how to properly and thoroughly irrigate all your plants, from newly planted seeds up to vegetables and flowers to lawns, shrubs, and trees. And I bet by the end of our chat, there will be at least one irrigation tip that will have you saying, I did not know that. And that includes one of the first comments you'll hear today, which is, if for some reason you ever got a job at a nursery, one of the first things they will teach you, and they will spend a lot of time teaching you, if it is a good nursery, how to water the plants. It's all in episode 329 of today's Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, How to Water. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots. Let's go. If for some reason you ever got a job at a nursery, one of the first things they will teach you, and they will spend a lot of time, if it's a good nursery, teaching you how to water the plants. So let's talk to somebody who's worked at a nursery and has actually taught people, too. It must be Debbie Flower, America's favorite retired college horticultural professor. How to water your garden.
Yeah.
We're talking new plantings of seeds or young plants in containers. We're talking sprinklers versus drip or container watering or in bed watering.
Did you set up the guest room? Because this is a big topic. I'm going to be here a while.
All right, I know. Yes. I think if we just cover the hazardous materials part, and I will start with the seeds. As far as you want to keep a seed bed evenly moist, the directions will tell you that anytime you plant seeds.
Yes.
Is keep the seed bed evenly moist. Well, how the heck do you do that if it's a little seed and it's only maybe a 1/4 inch deep?
Pretty foolproof way is to water from the bottom. Put the plants in a container. I've gotten those aluminum roasting pans at the inexpensive store. Mm-hmm. And I put the little containers, 6-packs, or this year I'm using some peat pellets in that container and put the water in the bottom of the container and let it be absorbed. Ah. Come back later, hour or two later, to see if there's still water in it. I want to dump it out. If they've used up the water, I'll add a little more and see if they absorb that. So I want the entire depth of the media to be moist, but I don't want them sitting in water. I have drowned seeds by having them sit in water.
You started them in peat pots.
I did.
Tell me about that.
Well, those are the ones I drowned because I went out of town. And I started zinnias and desert wildflower, I think, in peat pots because they don't like to be transplanted. They survive it, but they suffer a little bit. So I thought, well, I'll give this a try. First of all, finding reasonably priced peat pots was difficult.
Really?
Yes. Oh. Most of them are now infused with mycorrhiza of some sort, and I don't want to pay for that, and I don't need that. My seeds are going to do just fine germinating without all that stuff. And they come in different sizes. Yeah. It's another thing to be aware of. You can get very small ones. You can get bigger ones.
Well, you said you started them in peat pellets.
Peat pellets, yes.
Yeah. Tell us the difference between a peat pellet and a peat pot.
Right. Sorry about that. A peat pot is a pot shaped like, they're usually round, shaped like a little plastic pot, same size, but it's compressed peat moss. And they're the kind of pot that sometimes you can buy your plants in them. And if you do, they'll say you can plant the pot and everything with it. I would never do that, at least not without totally slicing down the sides in maybe 6 places and several X's across the bottom, because the compressed peat moss causes water problems around the roots of the plants when you put it in the ground. So I would slice it up as much as possible if I couldn't get the plant out and just plant it without the peat pot. They also come as coir. You can get coir pots. You can get cow poop pots. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of organic pots. They're all pretty much the same in terms of what you do when you plant them. We tried the coir pots at school for plants we sold at our plant sale, and I would always schedule about 9 weeks between the first seeds we would start growing, and those were usually in flats, to selling. And so they'd transplant over time as they needed to bigger pots and bigger pots. These were about 4-inch coir pots. They didn't make it. They couldn't physically stand up long enough to sell them. They would just keel over the pots themselves. Peat pots are a little more sturdy than coir pots. But I used peat pellets. Peat pellets are netting with a peat moss, I think it's just straight peat moss, in them, and they're dried and compressed. And so they look like a little wafer.
Okay, with a divot in the middle?
With a divot in the middle, right. The first things I ever planted from seed, I did into peat pellets, and I had a little tiny greenhouse that held 6 peat pellets.
That's a small greenhouse.
Quote unquote, yeah. It was a yellow base and then a clear top, rigid plastic. And up until about 6 months ago, I still had it. I broke the top finally. This was like 60 years ago that I did this. And you put the pellets in a solid container bottom and put water in, and they will expand. They rise up. And then as they get hydrated, and then you plant the seeds in them. And that's what I used this year, was the peat pellets, to put things in that don't like to have their roots messed with.
I've never planted with peat pellets. As it expands, does it close at the top and enclose the seed that you put in that divot?
I did what I usually do, which is make my own little divot with a chopstick, and put the seed in and cover it over with using my fingers. The divot is there. Sometimes it's on the sort of cattywampus because it didn't expand, or the divot wasn't in exactly the right spot.
But then with the idea, when you buy this peat pellet, it's got a smooth top and you're supposed to put a seed on top of it and then water it from the bottom?
You can water it from wherever you want, but you have to water it from the bottom to get hydrated first.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So you water it first before you plant the seed.
Yes, and it expands. Right. Then I plant the seed.
Okay.
I put these peat pellets in a container that didn't drain, and I put a dome, clear plastic dome over it, but that dome has air holes you can open. And I opened the top air hole and the sides because I wanted some airflow, and put it in the greenhouse. Well, the greenhouse has automatic overhead irrigation. I went on vacation for a week. I came back and they're floating because they got too wet. So I got 2 zinnias out of it.
How sad.
Yes, I have to replant. Yes. But, life is like this. And as a gardener, it's like, oh, now I know what I did wrong.
I just happened to get a package of 100 Zowie yellow flame zinnia seeds if you want some.
Zowie.
I really like it. It's really a nice seed.
Is it?
It's a nice plant. Yeah.
Sure, I'll take a few.
Okay.
I just got a cactus mix, 1 packet, and I have some left. So I'll try again. I'll just be later, and that's okay. So watering from the bottom is easy and not very stressful. When I plant seeds, like I did my tomatoes, I did some status. I decided I wanted some status create flowers that you can dry very easily, and I wanted a bouquet in the house. The bouquet I had in the house of status was probably 20 years old.
That's a sturdy plant.
Yes, they're like good dried flowers. I just start in 6 packs, which I have washed, and put the media in, and the media is moist when it goes in. Create the hole for the seed, put the seed in, cover it over. Then I put a layer of vermiculite over the top. Not a thick layer, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Vermiculite helps hold moisture over the seed, and that's a critical thing. As you said, keep the seed bed moist after planting. I'll do it if I direct seed. I'll put it out, vermiculite, over the place where I planted the seed out in the field as well. Because of its structure, it's like an accordion. It's made from expanded mica. Mica is a rock. It's been heated, and it expands like an accordion, so it has all those ins and outs, and water gets trapped in there. It helps keep the soil moist so the seed will germinate.
I wonder if that's the primary ingredient in these packages I see that are labeled seed coating. It's like something that you would put on top of a seed that you had scattered, like grass seed or something like that.
Sometimes for like if you buy one of those packets to fix a bare spot in your lawn, it's more like a mushed up newspaper.
Right. I've seen that too.
Yeah.
But this looks just like a seed starting mix, really.
Oh.
But I'm thinking, well, maybe it's primarily vermiculite, which it could be.
Well, that would work.
Okay.
And it disappears. It's shiny when you put it on, but over time it gets dirty and it's a rock. It disappears into the soil.
So it protects the seed and hydrates the seed.
I wouldn't say it hydrates the seed as much as it slows down the loss of moisture from the soil, and it holds some moisture itself. And then I use a breaker on the end of my hose. I have a watering wand on the end of my hose, and then a breaker. And a breaker is, on a watering can, it's called a rose. And it's the thing that's on the end of the watering can. You can unscrew it, but it has a lot of holes in it. And a fine breaker has many holes. You can get them 300, 500, 1,000. Yes. Yeah. And I turn the water on fairly strongly, and I turn the breaker up in the air and stand back away from the plants and let the water come down as if it's a rainstorm.
So there's a long stem on this.
Yes, I have this wand,
yes,
this 3-foot wand.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'd be under the rain.
Yeah.
Some days that's okay, but usually not seed starting season.
So it is less force on that soil by turning that wand upside down and letting the water go up first and then come
theoretically,
down?
But that may not be true. I haven't done the physics calculations on it. The further the water falls, it may be harder. But that's what I do.
Okay, all right.
Other people probably do other things. But yes, you have to create a system that works for you that doesn't cause, and this I had to work with students on this over and over and over again, doesn't cause the seeds to come flying right out of the container.
That's the whole idea. Yeah. Don't dislodge the seed when you water. So it has to be something gentle. I've mentioned this before. What I'm using is a dedicated 1-gallon sprayer with a spray nozzle on the end that produces a fine spray, and it's got like a 45-degree angle to it. And so basically I just use it for water and for new seedlings. And I just easily coat the top of the little seed bed every day or so with that.
Right. That would work great for in the field too, not just in containers.
Yeah. It does work. All right. So we've taken care of seeds as far as keeping them in place and yet keeping them hydrated. Plants in containers, young plants in containers especially. Again, that maybe the 6-pack you just bought of plants. I don't know how you water a 6-pack of plants with all the foliage that it might have. How the heck do you get the water into those little tiny
and that's containers? Where the training comes in.
Right.
That you learn how to correctly water a plant. I would show the students a video from Dramm, Dramm is a company that makes watering devices for industry as well as homeowners. And they have videos on the internet that you can watch. And there's one where the host is figuring out how much water is needed to be applied to 1 gallon. I guess it's perennials. I don't remember the plant. You need to water the entire column from top to bottom, whether it's a 6-pack or a 1 gallon or a 15 gallon. You need water to start at the top and wet the entire media. One point he makes is that you have to water each container. So the video is done in a greenhouse, and there are lots of plants on the ground in containers. You have to go each container. You don't just hold the hose over the top and swing it back and forth and hope everybody gets water. Like you said, there are leaves that are going to direct the water away from the center of the plant. That's one of the jobs of leaves, and it's so that the plant doesn't rot. You have to get under those leaves or between those leaves.
And again, they're using that rosette sprayer.
Yes.
That multi-hole contraption that emulates a shower, a gentle shower.
Yes.
That's the key.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the video, he counts how long he's over each plant. He does a bunch of plants and he just counts to 3, and a bunch that he counts to 6, and a bunch that he counts to 9. For example, don't remember the exact numbers. And then he unpots them. He lets them sit so the water will go in. You water, and you want to fill the head space, which is the space between the media and the top of the container. And in most cases, that's enough water to wet the whole column of soil in the container, and you want some to come out the bottom. So after he does his timed thing, his counting thing, he unpots the plants. And of course, the ones done with just the count of 3 were not wet all the way through. He picks the counting. And so then he knows that he has to do 6 or 9 counts over each plant, and you just walk around and you count and you make sure. Now, we didn't do those experiments when I worked at a nursery. I just walked from plant to plant and made sure that the whole headspace was full of water before I moved on to the next plant. And then I'd watch to see that some came out the bottom. The some coming out the bottom can be a false positive, so to speak, because if the plant has been allowed to dry out too much, the media has shrunk and the water will take the easiest way, which is around the shrunken media and out the bottom holes. In that case, then you need to water from the bottom. Like we talked about seedlings, put them in some kind of a container that doesn't drain, fill it with water, and allow the plant to suck it up from the bottom and rehydrate.
This conversation would also apply then to your plants in decorative containers.
Yes.
That you have scattered throughout the house, or even your house plants, or
yes,
you would take them to the sink and water them. I mean, I've gotten into the habit of taking my little house plants and sticking them in a Tupperware container that's about 2 feet long, 1 foot wide, and maybe 6 to 8 inches tall, and just putting an inch or so of water in the bottom and setting the plants in there and go do something else and come back and take them out later and then rinse them out again.
Yeah. Yeah. When you water from the bottom, if there's a lot of fertilizer in the media, it will come to the top and you'll start to see a white crust on the top. And that's an indication you need to flush this media with fresh water, allow it to drain out the bottom, and you don't want the plant sitting in that water. I have 40 or more houseplants, so I don't take them away from where they're settled and to the kitchen, but I make sure everyone has a little saucer underneath. I have a
catch basin.
And I water them and check that some water has come out into the bottom. And then if too much has come out, I get rid of it. Those catch basins have sort of a little raised surface. If it's above the raised surface, I will dump out the water. If it's not, I'll just let it sit there and create humidity.
What some people do as well is put a layer of gravel on the bottom of those catch basins.
Yes.
To keep the bottom of the pot away from the bottom of that catch basin.
So it's not sitting in the water, because if it sits in water, you're going to rot roots. Say that 3 times fast.
No, I won't. No. This is a good lesson, too, for watering containers, as far as when you mentioned that when water comes out immediately, you probably have a problem.
Yes.
And the opposite is true, too. You can be standing there and watering that container and counting to 100 or whatever. And if water isn't coming out, you've got another problem.
Yes. I have some plants on my front porch in large decorative containers, and I sometimes forget which ones don't drain. So the latter happens. I'm watering and I'm thinking, why isn't there any water coming out, going across my porch? It's because decorative pot has no drain holes. The grow pot does, but the water's going through the grow pot into the decorative pot and building up around the plant. So then I have to haul the plant out of the pot, dump the water out of the decorative pot, and put it back together again.
But that solves a couple of problems. A lot of people will set those plants on soil in the original container. And the roots will tend to grow out of those holes.
You'll never get it out of the ground.
You'll never get it out of the ground, or you're going to drown the plant because there's no way for the water to escape.
Right.
And by putting a container around that container, you're giving it sort of a demilitarized zone to avoid that problem happening.
Right.
And it's easier to be able to take the inside pot out and then dump out the water on the outside pot.
Yes.
So that works. All right.
Yeah.
You've heard me talk about the benefits of Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric container. Smart Pots are sold around the world and are proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Many of the imitators are selling cheaply made fabric pots that fall apart quickly. Not Smart Pots. There are satisfied Smart Pot owners who have been using the same Smart Pots for over a decade, actually approaching 20 years. When you choose Smart Pot fabric containers, you know you'll be having a superior growing experience with the best product on the market. And your plants will appreciate Smart Pots too. Because of the 1 million microscopic holes in Smart Pots, your soil will have better drainage and the roots will be healthier. They won't be going round and round on the outside of the soil ball like you see in so many plastic pots. The air pruning qualities of Smart Pots creates more branching of the roots, filling more of the usable soil in the Smart Pot. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. Let's get back to our conversation with America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, with more tips on how to water. All right, moving up in the world, you've got a lawn.
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't.
I sort of do.
Do you?
Well, I have that lumpy lawn.
Oh, you have the lumpy lawn. That's right. The
no-mow.
Oh, yeah, the no-mow. The mow-free.
Mow-free.
Yeah, the mow-free lawn. I've got a Heinz lawn. It's
Heinz?
57 varietals.
Oh, okay.
Of decorative weeds.
Okay.
Out there that I can keep green in the springtime. It's nice. The newer heads, especially the ones made by Hunter, are called MP rotators, and they send out little fingers of water. You're using less water at a time, so there's less waste and less chance of runoff, especially if you have that lawn on a slope, as opposed to the old impulse sprinklers that put out a ton of water, or even the old spray sprinklers that also put out a lot of water at one time. And I think the key, though, is to turn off that water as soon as you start seeing it run down the hill,
right,
off the lawn.
Surge irrigation is a name they give that kind of watering, where you water until you see runoff and you keep track of how long that was. Let's say it was 5 minutes. Then you turn it off for that same amount of time, 5 minutes, and then you turn it back on again until you see runoff again. Ideally, you've set a container, like a bunch of cans, whatever you're watering, and you're trying to get an inch of water. And so you see how long it takes to get that actual inch.
I have a report on that I will post in today's show notes on how to measure the water from your lawn sprinklers.
An inch a week is a good number for, I want to say, average temperatures. Is there such a thing? Yeah. Comfortable human outdoor temperatures. When it gets really, really hot, you're going to need a little more. And when it's cooler, you're wearing a jacket, you need less.
Thank you for that. All right. That's right. There are many forms of drip irrigation, and probably the least expensive is drip tape, which can be effective and efficient to irrigate crops. If you're a farmer, by reducing water usage, they can use up to 50% less water than traditional irrigation methods. However, because they're so cheap and thin, they need to be secured to the ground because they're going to blow all over the place. Little animals like to chew holes in them to go after the water, and they generally only last about a year, and you have to monitor them to look for those breaks while you're using them. So drip tape, I'm not fond of that for the backyard gardener.
But any of these soaker hoses, whether it's the ones with the slits in it or the round ones that, so to speak, weep, more water comes out in the low spot than the high spot. So they're only effective if used in a very flat garden.
I would go with something more sturdy, especially the inline drip emitter tubing, the 1/2 inch.
Yes. I use the 1/4 inch.
Flow. Well, okay, and there are limits to how long those runs can be. That's
10 feet.
10 feet, or it depends on the GPH, gallons per hour, that the emitters
and I did a supply line, a 1/2 inch supply line, all the way around a basically rectangular, not around 3 sides of a basically rectangular bed, and attached my 1/4 inch they had emitters in them every foot. So every foot I put a new line and came out of that one side of the supply line out 10 feet. Then I had to provide another supply line, and I attached them at both ends. So I basically had a ladder of irrigation lines all the way across the bed.
Okay, so it looked like a ladder. Okay, I was thinking it looked like a tic-tac-toe grid.
No, you don't have to cross them like that. Okay. I've seen people do that and talk about that, but you don't have to do that. Because there's an emitter every foot, you don't have to cross them going like a tic-tac-toe board.
So you're just basically laying out parallel lines.
Yep.
And the key, though, with either 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch drip irrigation tubing, the water that's emitted is going to go straight down in most soils, especially if it's a raised bed. You're only going to get a footprint, maybe 8 inches wide if it's a gallon per hour emitters, less than that if they're 1/2 gallon hour emitters. If you have a heavier clay soil, it'll be a bit wider. But again, if it's in a raised bed, it's going to be very narrow.
Right. So in my raised bed, I use micro sprays.
Good idea.
And you want head-to-head coverage. So I have them in the corners, I have them down the side, and then I have a row down the middle.
But micro sprayers and drip emitters don't play well together.
Right. That irrigation with the micro sprayers is on its own valve.
Right. Okay. Because when you start mixing, if you decide to put on a micro sprayer on a line that already has emitters built into it, into those pressure compensating turbulent flow emitters into the tubing, say halfway between where those two built-in emitters are, you decide, I'll put a 1/4 inch tube in here and run a micro sprayer around this plant. Chances are there isn't enough pressure to run it all because that micro sprayer has no pressure compensation to it.
It's just like the end of an open hose almost.
Yeah. Probably would work best on the end of a drip line.
Yes.
Although some people connect their drip lines so they form a big circle and keep the water going round and round. But yeah, separate lines are better.
Something I've seen, there's something called an Oya, O-L-L-A.
Oh, yeah.
Which is made of like red clay pots are. And you dig a hole and bury it and put water in it. And the water oozes out slowly. And now there's that last one. Kits, I've just noticed, and maybe I'm just behind the times, but noticed them this year for the first time. They look almost like water bottles.
Yeah.
And they connect at the top to, I believe it's drip line, and you bury them. So they're buried 6 inches. Somehow they get filled with water in these kits, and then they ooze water out. And I've considered that not for my whole raised bed. I think the raised bed is too big, but maybe for a container like a wine barrel, half wine barrel kind of container. Like you say, it matters what kind of soil, what texture soil you have, how much of the soil is going to get wet by these Oyas. So I'm not very knowledgeable about them. I'm very curious about them.
And again, it's spelled O-L-L-A. Even though you're being fancy and saying Oya.
Oya.
Oya. Okay. Park Seed says this about the Oya. An Oya is basically a low-fired clay vessel with a narrow neck. The pot is buried in the ground with only the neck protruding above the soil. Then crops are planted around the perimeter of the Oya at a distance based on the size of the Oya and the types of plants being grown. The Oya is then filled with water, and a cover is placed on the top to prevent soil and other debris from entering the Oya and to minimize evaporation of the water from the jar. How does the water get out of this clay pot?
It just oozes.
It just oozes.
Right.
All right. Is it a thin pot?
No, I don't think they're particularly thin. I have bigger ones, and they're as thick as a ceramic grow pot.
All right. It says, ideally, the gardener should only have to refill the Oya with water anywhere from once a day to once a week. Oyas should be refilled when the water reaches the 50% mark. As the soil becomes moist, the plant surrounding the Oya will grow towards the water source. In fact, many gardeners report that their Oya is covered with a thick mat of roots by the end of the season.
That refill part is that makes it complicated. Oyas I already own are much bigger than that, and they have a very narrow neck, and they don't have a lid on the top. And I haven't used them as much as I thought I might because I have to dig such a big hole to put them in the ground. I went away for a week after having planted some plants into the ground, and you can't just walk away from a newly planted plant. And I didn't want to turn on my whole irrigation system because the soil was pretty wet. We're having quite a bit of rain. But what needs to be watered regularly is the media that those plants were in when I bought them. So I went to my local nursery and it's like an Oya in that it's made from ceramic material, like an untreated clay pot, but it fits on the end of a bottle, a soda bottle, a wine bottle. So you put this, it's pointed like a carrot, shaped like a big fat carrot, with a point, and you stick it in the ground. So I put it right next to the
point down,
okay. Right next to the media my new plants came in, and then I filled bottles with water, turned them upside down, and put it in. My whole goal was just so they don't die while I'm gone. So because if you don't wet that media they came in, they will die. The roots have not yet gotten into the field soil.
How big were these bottles that you put on top? Like 16-ounce drinking water
bottles? 2 of them were wine bottles.
Wine bottles.
And one was
Should have thought of that.
I had to ask my husband for the wine. Do we have any? He said, look in recycling. And then one was a big drinking water bottle, not 16. It's probably 2 quarts.
So how big was this thing you stuck in the ground?
It was about 6 inches long.
Yeah.
And it came in a pack of 6 or something.
Couldn't hold much water. So most of the water remained in the bottle.
Yes, right.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Which was interesting. I was concerned with how much water, how effective. I hadn't used these before. How effective would they be? But I was pleased with the results, and I may continue to use this as a way to establish a new plant into the ground.
I'm reading from the Park Seed site about the Oya, O-L-L-A, and they go into high school biology here. Understand how osmosis works. Oyas work through a process of osmosis. Osmosis in biology is the movement of water molecules through a membrane from a high concentration of water molecules to a low concentration of water molecules. This will be on the final. Take notes. Think of the Oya vessel, which is composed of porous clay, as the membrane. The water in the Oya is a high concentration of water molecules. The soil surrounding the Oya has a low concentration of water molecules. The process of osmosis wants the water molecules to be equal on both sides of the membrane and will move the water from the high concentration, which is inside the jar, to the low concentration, which is in the soil. Osmosis theoretically will continue until the concentration is equal on both sides. The beauty of this system is if it rains, the amount of water molecules on the soil side of the jar is higher, so osmosis will slow or even stop until the soil starts to dry out, and then osmosis will begin again. That means it is impossible to overwater or waste water. It just seems to me, for a garden bed, you need a heck of a lot of Oyas.
Right. That's why I'd like to experiment with them in
Drink more wine.
in half wine barrels and grow something there and see what happens. See if that's enough. If 1 Oya is enough, I'm thinking 3 maybe.
Yeah. Boy, I got to consider a half barrel like you would a raised bed. It's going to be a narrow column of water that exudes, if you will, from the Oya into the soil. I think 4.
You think all 4? Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I don't know. Try it. Experiment.
Right.
Yes. Send us some Oyas, Park. All right.
Yeah, we'll try it.
Yeah. We'll see how well they work. All right. That's interesting. That's okay. So this technology, if you will, goes back to...
Oh, it's ancient.
Ancient, yes. First used in northern Africa as long as 4,000 years ago. So there's that. All right. So is it a special clay?
Well, they said when they talked about it, something about how it was fired.
Yeah.
You read it, but
Good for me. A low-fired clay vessel with a narrow neck, but it doesn't...
I don't understand clay enough to know what low-fired means.
Yeah, I don't know either.
If I do try it, I'll put it in the ground, put water in it, I'm looking at putting it in raised bed type conditions and then use a moisture meter to try to find where this water is going. How far away from the Oya is it going?
Again, that depends on the soil.
It does.
Yeah. So if you have a heavy clay soil, that could be 18 inches.
All right.
If it's a raised bed, I'll go with 8.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all right. Yeah. Let me know how that works out for you.
All righty.
All right. Oyas. All right. So we've covered watering seeds, watering young plants in containers, watering mature plants in containers, sprinklers versus drip, in-ground versus raised bed and containers. And then there's good old rain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why if you have an automatic irrigation system, hopefully it's more modern and will turn off when it rains, as opposed to the old ones where you have to go manually turn it off when it rains. So we're coming to that day, and it's going to happen probably sooner and later, where there will be soil moisture meters that will be inexpensive enough and common enough that we will be able to water our entire landscapes by a machine, by a robot who will be getting the data from all these sensors in the soil.
Right. When it rains, you were saying, and then there's rain.
Yeah.
When it rains, we get a nitrogen fertilizer event.
Oh, yeah.
Because nitrogen exists primarily on Earth as a gas in the air. It's the number one component of air. And in order for it to be used by a plant, it has to be what's called fixed. And fixed means just that the nitrogen has bonded with an oxygen or a hydrogen.
NHO2.
Yeah.
No way, that's ammonia.
NO2 or NO3, nitrate, ammonium, NH4 plus, I think. That happens when there's combustion. In nature, before humans had cars that do combustion or power plants that do combustion, it was lightning primarily that did combustion. But that just leaves molecules of fixed nitrogen floating around in the air. They're not heavy enough to fall to the earth. Then rain comes. And rain washes that fixed nitrogen to the earth, and that is what plants can use to fertilize themselves. So when I lived in Nevada, of course, everybody had to irrigate because we only got 6 inches of rain a year. If you wanted anything to live, you had to irrigate, and things would look okay. And then we'd get a rainstorm, and things would look beautiful and lush and green because of this generalized water, but also generalized nitrogen event.
And it wasn't because of a lightning storm. It was a rainstorm.
So a rainstorm is washing the fixed nitrogen back to the earth.
Okay. I always thought lightning had to be involved for that nitrogen increase.
Lightning does fix the nitrogen, but so does running your car. And so does running any kind of combustion will fix nitrogen.
Okay. You have a lot of GM stock, apparently. Talking about internal combustion engines here. All right. Find the system for watering that is most comfortable with you, that does the best job, and stick with it.
And visit your plants. Whatever system of watering you use, go visit your plants.
If you have an automatic watering system, especially if you have drip irrigation connected to that automatic watering system, you need to get out there and run the system manually. Look for leaks, look for breaks, look for clogs. It won't fix itself.
Right. And look for plants in distress. That might lead you to the problem with your irrigation.
But by then it might be too late.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
What a sad note to end on. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome, friend.
Okay, here's your garden to-do list for the day. Spend some quiet time in the yard. Walk, converse, smell, and touch all your plants. Enjoy the texture, the aromas, the color combinations, the structure. Admire the naturally amazing artwork of plant leaves. Check both sides of those leaves for eggs or insects. And if you're checking for eggs or bugs on your plant, make sure that they're the bad guys and not the good guys before you shoo them away. Take a seat out there. Watch and listen to the visitors to your yard, from insects to birds to four-footed creatures, some of whom may be of dubious benefit. And if you would please, help spread the word to your gardening friends and family about the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. Leave a thumbs up or a comment on the show at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can do that at our homepage as well, gardenbasics.net. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, leave a comment, share, and a thumbs up as well at the newsletter Beyond the Garden Basics. It's on Substack. By the way, that's where you can find the pictures of what the most beneficial insects look like, including their eggs, and that will be in the April 26th and the May 3rd, 2024 editions of the newsletter Beyond the Garden Basics. You can find a link to all of these in today's show notes. And as always, thanks for listening. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday. It's brought to you by Smart Pots. It's Garden Basics, available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast and transcripts of the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net. And that's where you'll also find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Garden Basics. And thank you so much for listening.